If you are a parent or have young kids in your household, please pay attention to my warning. My name is Sophia, and I had a near death experience on a chilly night in December of 2022. I am convinced that Jesus himself revealed me the risks that technology poses to my generation on that night. Before that night that changed my life, I didn't even believe in something like this. And now I've found this channel so that I may warn as many adults and young people as I possibly can. And I ask that you please listen to me. Post a comment below if you think I'm right. In the event that you are in agreement or disagreement with this vision, then here we go. It was a typical Friday evening, and I was lying down on the couch in our living room, scrolling through my phone in an unending manner. YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok apps, I was caught in a never-ending cycle of stuff that didn't appear to have any significance. But I couldn't seem to break free of it. Hours passed without me even realizing it. My parents had gone to bed, my siblings were in their rooms, and I was by myself with the content. Luminosity of my screen, I felt a peculiar dizziness that made me feel as though the room was spinning. I thought that perhaps I had been staring at the screen for an excessive amount of time, or that my blood sugar was too low. I told myself that I would just get up and get some water, but before I could move, everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was no longer in my living room. I was floating above my body and staring down at myself. I was slumped over on the couch with my phone, and it still glowing in my hand. I felt panic and confusion, wondering if I was dead and what was happening. I tried to cry out, but there was no sound. That moment, a blinding light filled the room, cutting through the darkness like nothing I had ever seen before. I turned to look, and there he was, Jesus. He did not look like the pictures in church or the paintings you see in Sunday school. He was more radiant, more powerful, and more real than anything I had ever known. His presence was not just light, it was love and authority all wrapped into one. I wanted to fall to my knees, but I couldn't move. Come, he said, extending his hand towards me. His voice was calm, but it carried weight that left no room for argument. Without hesitation, I reached out and took his hand. The moment I did, the room disappeared, and we were standing in what felt like a void. It wasn't empty, though. All around us were glowing screens hovering in midair, phones, iPads, and personal computers. Even virtual reality TVs. Headsets were more than just equipment. They were alive with something sinister. Sinister faces gazed back at me from those screens, millions of them. Yet, their eyes were blank. It was as if they were under the influence of hypnosis. Jesus made a motion towards the displays and stated, "This is the battlefield." His voice was filled with both sorrow and urgency as he said, "The enemy has made this his primary weapon against your generation, which includes millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha. Aware of your capabilities. He is aware of what you are capable of. Accomplish for my kingdom, so he is working to kill you." I didn't understand how it's just technology. It's just entertainment. I didn't understand how it's just technology. Jesus turned his head and looked at me, and I will never forget the sadness that was visibly present in his eyes. He began by saying, "What you perceive to be harmless is actually quite the opposite." I took a closer look at the screens and noticed that the enemy is using them to enslave hearts, minds, and souls. Technology was supposed to be a tool, but it has turned out to be a trap when I looked at them more closely. There were chains that extended from them. There were chains that were tied around people's wrists, necks, and even their hearts. Some of the people were shackled so tightly that they could not move. Each chain had a word engraved on it, juxtaposition, distractions from anxiety and lust, envy, of pride. As I glanced at the displays, the words, "They don't even know they're chained," etched themselves into my head. I said that this is the worst deception the adversary could possibly pull. Jesus responded by saying that he would enslave people without their knowledge. Suddenly, they took on a red hue. There were flames flickering at the borders, and I noticed a terrible symbol blazing on every screen. It wasn't only on the gadgets, though. It started to emerge on people's foreheads and hands as if it were being burned into their skin. "What is that?" I asked, my voice quivering. "It is not yet the mark of the beast," he added, "but it is conditioning them to accept it." Jesus gazed at me with a gravity that caused my heart to stop beating. They are being conditioned to value convenience, acceptance, and rapid satisfaction above all else. And when the time comes, They will take the mark without hesitation. This is because the enemy is preparing their hearts to worship him rather than me. I fell to take a breath. I reflected on the number of hours that I had spent staring at my phone, the number of times that I had experienced feelings of worthlessness as a result of what I had seen online, and the number of disputes that I had with my parents when they urged me to put my phone away. Down the phone. The scene changed and I found myself standing in what appeared to be a massive war zone. It wasn't a physical battlefield with guns and soldiers, but rather it was filled with families, parents, grandparents, children, and teenagers. All of them were standing on one side of the battlefield, but they weren't fighting together. The older generations were yelling at the younger ones. I'd always believed that they were responding excessively. However, I was no longer so sure. The younger generations were roaring back, blaming their parents for not understanding them or for causing the same problems that they were struggling with. Meanwhile, the adversary waited in the shadows, smiling as he sowed division where they were supposed to be together. They were accusing them of being lazy, selfish, and addicted. But the adversaries has turned them against each other, and the elder generations need to wake up and recognize that their children and grandchildren are being turned against them. Jesus spoke this in a voice that was heavy with sadness. Since they are being attacked, they need to fight for them rather than against them. According to Jesus, they must teach my word. They must show an example by placing me above all else. And even their own distractions, many of them have been lulled to sleep by the same technologies. I inquired what they might do, and Jesus told them that they must pray. While I was looking around, I noticed that many of the older folks were hooked to their phones, either scrolling through the news or playing games, while their youngsters were wandering off into the darkness. My heart was shattered by the next thing I witnessed. Hard. It was a church service, but it was unlike any other church I had ever been to. The sanctuary was packed with people, but the majority of them weren't paying attention. Some were scrolling through their phones during worship, while others were taking selfies during the sermon. The pastor was preaching with a lot of passion, but his words seemed to be falling on deaf ears. The room was filled with the glow of screens, which seemed like an artificial light that was drowning out the presence of God. This is my house, is Jesus. Lam stated his voice, which was shaking with both fury and sorrow, but unfortunately, it has turned into a marketplace for distractions. These days, my people are not looking for me with their whole hearts. Rather, they are looking for entertainment, validation, and convenience. I wanted to yell, weep, and make everyone awake, but I was unable to do any of those things. I decided to turn to Jesus, desperate for answers, and I begged him, "What can I do? I'm just a kid." Jesus put his hand on my shoulder, and his eyes met mine. "Lord, you are greater than you could ever imagine." And it was like, for you, so loving, patient, persistent. "I believe you are," he said. "I have selected you to be my messenger, and I have chosen you to warn not only your generation, but all generations as well. However, they will not listen to me, and tears will be flowing down my face. They will believe I am crazy, and they will reject me as well. However, some people will hear, and their eyes will be opened. In that very instant, I felt the weight of his words rest on my heart, and I realized that I didn't have the courage to speak up, tell them what you have seen, and warn them that time is running out. I had no idea how I was going to handle it, but I was certain that I couldn't maintain my silence for a moment. I found myself back in my living room. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the tears on my face. My phone was still in my hand, but it felt different now. It was cold, heavy, and sinister. I threw it across the room and fell to my knees, crying out to God. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I prayed as if I had never prayed before. Prayed for my friends, my family, my generation, and even for the generations that came before me. That God will give me the strength to share what I had seen. If you are reading this, I believe it is because Jesus wants you to hear this warning. This isn't just about kids and their phones. It's about all of us. The enemy is using technology to distract, divide, and destroy. He is conditioning us to accept what is coming, and if we don't wake up, it will be too late. Parents, grandparents, older friends, and friends of all ages, you have a role to play. And pray for your children and others. When grandchildren have conversations with them about these topics, Set an example by putting down your own devices and seeking God first. To my generation, don't allow the enemy take your soul through a screen. Instead, seek Jesus, study his word, and find your worth in him, not in the number of likes, comments, or followers you have. When there is a limited amount of time, it belongs to you.